Well, of course, we have the queen of the lesbians, Louise and Viv, and they're here tonight. That's Louise Young and Vivienne Armstrong, if you just moved here from another planet. And Louise and Viv have been active in the gay and lesbian civil rights movement since 1971. Louise and Viv have been active in the LGBT movement since 71. They joined the Gay and Lesbian Front while at the University of Colorado. Shortly after moving to Dallas in 1976, they joined the Dallas Gay Political Caucus, now known as the Dallas Gay and Lesbian Alliance. And Louise and Viv have worked tirelessly to build political relationships between the LGBT community and Dallas and other political organizations that to this day still support our community. In 1993, they represented LGBT Americans in President Clinton's inaugural parade. They were on the float for Families for America together, and in their 42-year relationship, they've been featured in many books. They're recipients of numerous awards, including our local Black Tie Kuchling Award, Humanitarian Award. And Louise has been especially active in the workplace equality movement. She retired after a 33-year career at Raytheon. She really is a rocket scientist. And she was instrumental in having Raytheon become the first aerospace and defense company to score 100% on the HRC Corporate Equality Award. That's kicking butt. And those effects of Raytheon's score pulled a lot of the aerospace and defense industry companies into the light and up on the Corporate Equality Index because nobody wanted someone else to treat their gays and lesbians better than they did. That's because of Louise. Viv retired after a distinguished career of more than 30 years with the Visiting Nurse Association, including leadership in HIV services, but their contribution to our community and the framework and foundation of our community is unmeasurable.
We're going to focus mainly on 2 years that were critical in the history of GLBT Dallas. But first, just a little bit of a background.
How we became activists. You know, we're not, unlike being born that way, we're not born as activists, or at least maybe some of us do come with a little fuss or what have you. But in the spring of 1971, I was finishing up nursing school, and I went with some of my classmates to my first gay bar and got called a lessie as we were walking across the street to get there by a car full of driving boys. And it was like, whoa, so this is what this is all about.
Oops, that's spring of 69.
Oh, excuse me, spring of 69. I'm reading Louise's part. Here we go. Okay, here. All right, now. That was the spring of 69. That was before Stonewall. So it was kind of like, whoa, you know, what might I be in for here? I moved to Colorado to take a job and had met a couple women there right after I got there that were with the Daughters of Bilitis. And some of you may know that name and some of you may not, but that harkens back to the 50s and the 60s in terms of the very closeted kind of life that we led back then. And they were younger women, and they were kind of having trouble finding jobs, and so they left me with the keys to a post office box for the DOB and a subscription to the Ladder, and moved on to Reno, Nevada. And so here I was, and I had those, and so I got a few inquiries via the post office box, read all the Ladder magazines, which enlightened me quite a bit, really. And at that point in time, I joined up through some of the inquiries with the students at the University of Colorado in the newly formed Gay Lesbian Front.
Gay Liberation Front.
Excuse me. Well, I wanted to make it a lesbian front. We had our part.
Right. Well, right. The organization that was started in the fall of 1970 was the Gay Liberation Front, and it was not an officially recognized organization at the University of Colorado, but Viv was among the founding members, and in the spring of '71, I was finishing my PhD coursework there at the University in Boulder, and I was teaching a geography lab. And one of my students asked me out for coffee, and he looked at me and said, "Are you gay?" And of course I was taken aback. And I said, well, no, are you? And he said, yes, I am. And I said, well, you know, maybe I am too. So, you know, there's strength in numbers. And he invited me to a film night that the Gay Liberation Front was sponsoring, and the film that they were showing was called The Boys and the Band. Now, that's a real up for somebody who's just kind of come out, like me, who has just come out of the closet. And for those of you who know about The Boys and the Band, it's not a very optimistic portrait of our community, but at any rate, I started going to Gay Liberation Front meetings, and that's where I met Viv.
Yeah, she didn't talk to me right away either. She just kind of looked at me. I knew what she was wearing, though, at one of the events.
Well, and there was a barn dance that the Gay Liberation Front held in, I think it was in April of 1971, and it was a wonderful, wonderful event. And it was really a heady experience to go to a barn outside of Boulder. It was one of those party barns that was rented out. And there were like 500 gay men and lesbians dancing and having a wonderful time. Of course, I, being shy and kind of new to the scene, volunteered to be one of the bartenders behind the bar and take people's bottles and write their name on them and do the drinks. And this beautiful redhead came up and gave me her bottle of whatever you were drinking.
Scotch. Terry, scotch.
And I said, save me a drink, save me a dance later. And gave, I guess, a dazzling smile. It worked.
Oh, yeah, except that she danced with a lot of other people first.
Yeah. And so after the event was over, I was doing cleanup, and I always like to be handy and, you know, go around and clean up. And I noticed Vivienne was cleaning up too.
Sobering up, cleaning up.
And she said, is there anywhere we can get some coffee? And well, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and the only place that I knew that we could get coffee was at my apartment. And so I know, I mean, it really was. And so Viv, do you want to?
So she said, well, follow me and I'll show you. And we drive up and it says motel on the sign. And I went, oh, God, this is the worst yet.
Well, what happened was the motel would rent the units out to students during the school year, and then to the travelers in the summertime and tourists. So I said, no, I really live here. So we talked the night away, and then soon became a couple. I was interviewing for a teaching job in Oklahoma at my alma mater in my hometown of Ada, Oklahoma, and I asked Viv if she would go to Oklahoma with me. And sight unseen, Viv went to Ada, Oklahoma.
Yeah, I felt really hard. I had a hard time explaining that to the people in Colorado that I was moving to Oklahoma.
Right.
And my family in California that I had moved to Colorado, and now I was going to Oklahoma. You can imagine where they thought I was going.
So at any rate, before we left, though, I had had a couple of experiences doing speaking engagements to civic groups in Boulder and to usually psychology classes. And the first opportunities that I'd really ever had to do speaking engagements, one of them I particularly remember, it was to a Rotary Club in Boulder. And back then, again, you know, we're talking less than 2 years after Stonewall, that when you go to a speaking engagement, you're the only gay or lesbian person, you know, never mind bisexual or transgender, that the audience has ever heard. or think they've ever seen. And so it's very responsible. You're put in a very responsible position. But it was very heady for me because I realized that I could be the face of our community, and what a privilege that was. When we moved to Oklahoma, we didn't really do much in the way of activism, except Viv took the post office box.
Right here. We took the post office box with us, and we were asked at the post office, and what kind of organization was this? And I just said, oh, it's a literary poetry club. And we did help a few people who did send inquiries to the address in southern Oklahoma. I mean, you just like the radio station. I mean, you'd be surprised at wherever people can find information and support, they do want it.
But the last class I took before taking taught before taking a sabbatical to finish my doctoral dissertation was one on homosexuality. And you know, as a geography instructor, it was kind of put into question what my credentials were to teach such, but I co-taught it with a professor in sociology who knew that we were a couple, and we really taught a very, very popular course, and it got rave reviews. It was really amazing. We had a speaker from the University of Oklahoma's Gay Liberation Front, and it really, I think, enlightened a lot of people. The downside was that I didn't get my contract renewed. So there I was without a job, and Viv was working at the United Cerebral Palsy Center in Denver, but all of a sudden, I had a job teaching at Southern Illinois University. So went out, did the interview, and everything fell through. But Viv had already told the folks.
I'd already quit my job because she had a job, you know. Said, I'm moving, you know, give you all this advance notice to fill my position. And I came in 3 days later and said, plans kind of fell through. Really like my job back. They hadn't done anything. And I was told that my lifestyle would precluded me from ever being hired back again. And almost everyone that I worked with in the agency knew, in fact, had socialized with us and that, and so it was just the administration that was, you know, behind that. The ACLU said they'd take our case after talking with us and doing some research, and fortunately and unfortunately that didn't happen because Louise got a job here in Dallas.
I got a job offer at Texas Instruments Incorporated, and it was a good one, and it put us close to my parents in Ada, Oklahoma, who were in failing health, and who, by the way, were very, very supportive of us as a couple from word go back in 1971. So, yes, indeed.
I was a second daughter.
I owe everything. I owe everything I am as an activist to something that my parents said. They said, go out and make a difference in the world, and I hope I followed their counsel, and everything that I am I owe to my parents. At any rate, so we were two people mad as hell, and we weren't going to take it anymore, and we arrived in Dallas.
And that was the September of '76, just in time to register to vote before November. And we didn't know a soul here in Dallas. Not anybody, not anything about a community or whatnot. So one of the things we did is we said, well, we need to find the bars, and where would they be? Well, the same place that we found the bars in Amarillo and Santa Barbara and those other places. We called the Vice Squad. Did y'all ever try that when you're out traveling? And, you know, they just say, you know, you just say, call the police, and you just say, may I connect me with the Vice Squad? And they do. And then you just say, well, I just want to know where are the gay bars and lesbian women bars, and it's like, ma'am, why do you want to know? And it's like, well, because I want to go. We don't want to end up in those other bars, you know. And in Amarillo, we even asked for directions.
which they gladly gave, and it was a wonderful bar, and we had a great evening.
Yeah.
But so
great Amarillo hospitality.
We were in the women's bar, and if anybody can shout out the name, if you remember, it was on Lower McKinney Avenue, and it was on the...
Had a red door?
It had a red door, and...
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah. Bev's.
Bev's. Okay, great.
Yeah, that's
where we went. And go ahead.
And, you know, we're in there and we're looking around and getting acquainted and whatnot, and we noticed this wonderful poster. And DGPC, Dallas Gay Political Caucus, had formed in 1976, and this was in the winter of 76, 77. And they had these wonderful posters that announced their meetings, and they were beautiful silkscreen, very artsy posters, and if anybody has any of those, they need to go into the archives because they are real true collector's items. The artwork, a lot of it was done by Steve Arnn, and some other folks I think were involved in that as well, artists that did that as well. And that is how we found the, well, we kind of couldn't count Mondays very well, and that's when the meetings were, and so it took us till February to get there. But we showed up at the February meeting of the Dallas Gay Political Caucus held at the MCC Church at Reagan and Brown.
And that particular meeting was really eventful. I mean, imagine how, you know, here we are, you know, two lesbians, new to Dallas, and what is happening that night was actually kind of, I guess, what you could politely call the changing of leadership.
I called it a coup.
But it really was kind of a coup, but it was a well-meaning coup because the first president, Chance West, had to drop out, and an interim president named Pat Cherry, female Pat, had taken the role of acting president and I guess really didn't have the energy to devote to the job. So there was a vote that night to instill a very charismatic young man named Steve Wilkins. And Don Baker stood up and made a great speech for Steve, as did Dick Peoples. And so it was really a great meeting, even though it was kind of confusing.
Yeah, we were kind of like, oh, what's going on here, you know? And, but they talked to us on the way out. We introduced ourselves and told them where we're from and that we were interested. And they said, oh, well, be sure you come back and stay in touch. And by the March meeting, Louise had already been involved in being the secretary of the organization.
And sometimes you think, well, secretary isn't that important, but Steve Wilkins called me and said, you know, we don't have a secretary, and you seemed so interested, so would you like to do this? And I said, sure, put my name up, and the members voted on me, and this was in like March of '77, so I became secretary, and somewhere in our garage archives, I still do have a couple of double ring binders that have really very valuable notes, which I will donate to the archives, which talks about the meetings in the early years.
Now, you guys are thinking meetings, right? You know, like how many of y'all go to a monthly meeting?
Yeah.
You know, every other month. We had
Monthly meetings.
We had a monthly membership meeting, but we met every week as a board, and then we had other committee meetings as a board, so that we were meeting 5, 6, 7 days a week.
So it's, you know, but there was a lot happening, and this gets to the heart of what we're talking about, and we're going to make it very concise, but it's really, really important that you all understand the critical, absolutely pivotal years of our community in Dallas that were 1977 and 1978. And first of all, in 1977, there were some events happening in Dade County, Florida, the Miami area. The Miami kind of county commissioners had passed, in January of '77, passed a non-discrimination act that covered sexual orientation. So then there was a backlash to that. And the backlash was led by a former Miss Oklahoma named Anita Bryant. And she had an organization called Save Our Children.
Oh, but she also had a singing career. That was her talent at the Miss America contest. She was third runner-up, by the way. And she had gotten a job peddling orange juice for the Florida Orange Juice Commission. And so, you know, that's what she did going around the country for a living. And then Save Our Children came along with her great slogan, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
That's the first time I had heard that. And, you know, that tired old thing, you know, you know, beating a dead horse, we still hear it today. But that was the first time that I heard Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And so, at any rate, the Save Our Children was actually the first backlash conservative organization that formed after the gay rights movement. It predates the moral majority. And Jerry Falwell really latched on to Save the Children and kind of used it as a blueprint for his organization, the moral majority. There was a vote in early June, and you know how things usually turn out, up until recently, turn out when our rights are put on the ballot. And it was recalled. About 65% voted to recall the ordinance. So everybody was fired up about Anita Bryant, even here in Dallas, and everybody was fired up about bar raids that were happening almost every week.
And so the board went into a retreat in the June of '77. They set up a very definite set of goals and a mission for the organization, and being focused on trying to get our rights and equality. And first of all, we felt that repeal of 2106 of the statute of the state penal code was absolutely, you know, critical, because we couldn't be criminals and be able to live our lives. And even though that's still on the books, thank God for the Supreme Court on that one.
And so we did have goals. We had goals. We had a mission statement. There in the room in June of '77, in the retreat, it was at our house in East Dallas. Vivienne cooked for us. She wasn't on the board yet, but Vivienne cooked for us.
I cooked my way on the board.
Right. And Steve Wilkins, of course, Don Baker, Dick Peoples, Jerry Ward, and me. And we drew up the...
Jack.
No, not there.
Not there? Oh, okay.
We drew up committees too. And we presented that to our membership meeting in June of '77. The room was packed. Again, see, this doesn't happen like this anymore because there are all these organizations and all these other things we can do. But we were packed. And so Steve took the podium, laid out the committees, said what we were going to do. Everybody cheered.
And Don Baker, the teacher, had white paper taped on all the walls with places for you to sign up for all the committees and what they were going to be doing, so that it was very organized like a teacher.
And people signed up. They wanted to do something because Anita Bryant had driven us together. It was the catalyst for our movement, and it even reached Dallas. Another thing that happened in June of yes, that's right.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you, Anita Bryant. The other thing that happened, very critical, in June of '77, Steve Wilkins and I went to the first, and this was the first, National Gay Leadership Conference in Denver, Colorado. And I mean, it was the who's who from the East Coast, the West Coast, not too many from the Midwest, but particularly from the East Coast and the West Coast. And at this particular time, it gave us an opportunity to let folks know that we're with them here in Dallas. And I think they probably got the idea that there's money to be raised in Dallas. We'll see. Go ahead.
Well, and after that, you know, we also ended up putting a full-page ad in the Brownwood paper when Anita Bryant went down there, and I'm sure they never saw such before, but it had the Statue of Liberty, and we had a presence there because we just couldn't let her come that close to North Texas without doing something. But then she went and sang, you know, down at the Texas Bar Association meeting in Houston, and Texans, gay Texans, were upset. Hundreds went from North Texas, and over 13,000 people marched during the night in the streets of Houston to protest Anita Bryant's presence at the Texas Bar Association.
That's right. And is there anybody else here tonight that was there that night in Houston? Is there anybody? I can't see your hand. Shout out.
Well,
okay.
We didn't have a parade permit, so we had to stay on the sidewalk, but some of our friends were in the auditorium where she was singing, and they could hear us outside from the street as we went by. That's how loud we were. So, I mean, and that, again, it galvanized us. And then she was going to speak in Brownwood, and so we put this full-page ad in the Brownwood paper, as Viv said. Now, this is a link to the name of this organization, the Dallas Way. What happened was that Steve and Don went down to Brownwood and talked to the editorial board and convinced them to put the ad in. It was very, very tasteful, talking about the Statue of Liberty, and here comes another woman to Brownwood, and she doesn't stand for the same things that our Statue of Liberty stands for. Very nice ad. And, pardon? Uh-oh, it's okay. Okay, okay. So Steve told us, he said, you know, this is the Dallas way of doing things. He said, we work within the system, we go down, put on our best suits, our briefcase, and we meet them on their own ground. And he said, that's the Dallas way. Mm-hmm. So, go ahead. And the Dallas way continues. We really got our political start in '78 with the Democratic primaries. And that was when DGPC first endorsed Charles Rose for state representative. The Political Action Committee had gotten together, and we had a particular enemy in a fellow named Clay Smothers, who was a state representative from the Oak Cliff area. And, you know, a Democrat. Oh, he was a Democrat, all right, but he had voted against
he was a co-sponsor of 2106.
Right. And so, you know, he had particular enmity with our group. And on top of that, just to say how bad he was, years later, his family had founded a school for wayward boys, which he was indicted and convicted for abuse at that school for those young men. And so we got our feet really wet, and my, you know, well, also my elbows in silk screenings, yard signs.
We did everything paint, for that campaign.
Phoning.
You know, phone banks, poll watching, everything. And that was our first foray, the primary of May 1978. Now, also primary night, we had told our members to go back to their precinct convention meetings and to enter resolutions to repeal Section 2106, and by golly, they did. And there were hundreds of resolutions passed across the state, but dozens here in Dallas. And so it was a wonderful thing. Viv and I had a few months earlier gone to a Texas Democratic Leadership Conference, and we had made contacts with the Democratic leaders. And one thing we could tell the Democratic leaders was We have an energized base. And I'll tell you what gets attention is an energized base of volunteers.
Voters.
And volunteers.
And volunteers, yes. And we didn't have money, but we had volunteers. And we ended up really taking to heart what they taught at these leadership conferences. We ended up organizing our folks. 78 was the primaries were the first. Charles Rose did lose, but not by much. But we took heart. By November, well, actually by September, Louise had left her job and was volunteering full-time for Jim Maddox to get reelected to Congress. He had a tough race. And he was running against a fellow who's thinking about running for governor this year.
His name Tom Hawken.
And that was a very tough race, but we worked in the Political Action Committee on a lot of different fronts and volunteered and whatnot, and
registered voters.
Registered voters.
In the Oak Lawn precinct. Now, and we're going to cut it off because, you know, I don't want to bore you guys, but what happened was that heretofore, Oak Lawn had always gone Republican, overwhelmingly Republican. So what happened, we went out, registered the voters, and you have to remember, there were no computers. There was no, I mean, how do you communicate with the community? So we interviewed candidates and we put our community people on like 4x6 index cards.
Yeah, every registration we had to ask people if they would let us
use their
information, and some people were really afraid because they were
afraid
of losing confidentiality, and so we wouldn't keep their records.
But we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names. Handwritten, and that we would sit there and hand copy all of the envelopes, stuff the envelopes with our endorsement cards. Well, Congressman Maddox had voted with us a couple of times in Washington, and finally, kind of reluctantly, his brother Jerry came and asked for an endorsement because it wasn't just really, really popular to get the gay community's endorsement in '78, but he did. And so it was election night. This is still one of the great memories of my life, that everybody at Maddox headquarters, they had given up because the only precincts that hadn't been counted were Oak Lawn precincts. And they knew that they had always gone Republican, and so they were just giving up. And I walked in the room and I said, wait, that's our territory. It's going Democratic. And they said, no, it's not. It never has. Well, guess what? It went Democratic. It put Jim Maddox over with the help of the Oak Lawn Democrats. And by golly, he won re-election. And I'll never forget his brother tearfully embracing me, saying, Louise, your people did it. And I thought, oh. But that's where we come from, folks. It is a rich history. And like I said, what I hope we've shown you is just a little snippet of what happened in those early years and why it became so important that we went out, we registered people, we volunteered in campaigns, because one thing that political office holders understood in those early years, when they wouldn't be for us because it was the right thing to do, they understood that volunteers are priceless. And if you have a block vote, it's worth going after and it's worth making a stand for. So with that, I think, you know, we'll just go ahead and end it. Yeah, Thank you so much.
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, it's all kind of a blur anyway, because there were so many campaigns, so many mail-outs, so many phone banks. I mean, we started out with rotary dial phones, okay? I mean, you know, it was great when we got to the push-button ones. But, I mean, And when computers came along,
Oh,
that
man.
was even, oh, you talk
We
about
threw out-
labels. We could just slap those labels on.
We threw out those index cards, and boy, we were going to
But
town.
it took armies of people, and I know
Armies
that
of
many of
people.
you out there have volunteered, and many people who are not with us also.
Bill Nelson, Terry Thibodeau,
I mean, the
Cobb
marches on
Keller.
Washington always brought us more volunteers.
Yeah, that
and-
group,
and-
Mike Richards, people with just enormous amounts of energy threw themselves in to the political process, and I believe with all my heart that those years launched us into the successful community that we now enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.